Hey guys, it's Etor. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to ask you something. What's your story? We all have one, and sometimes it takes the right space and a little guidance to bring that story to life. That's why I created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. It's a unique space for men to explore their identities, reflect on personal experiences, and use writing as a tool for self-discovery. Whether you're an experienced writer or have never written a word, this workshop is for you. Join me and other like-minded men on this journey. Visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more. Thanks. And now on to today's episode. Do you ever get the feeling that you're somehow different? Like how the world works just isn't right for you? Or maybe you've noticed that your ways of processing your experience don't seem to follow the same patterns as other people's. It could be more than just a feeling. In today's episode, I am excited to introduce you to ADHD life, relationship, and career coach Shane Thrapp. Through Shane's story, we'll explore the nuances of living with both ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, from the struggles to the unexpected gifts. Shane's journey from personal battles to becoming a guide for others serves as a powerful testament to the strength found in embracing our diversity. My conversation with Shane was a complete eye-opener for me, as I didn't realize how much I didn't know about the neurodivergent experience. I think you'll find his impressive journey to discovering and expressing his authenticity unique, surprising, and inspiring. So let's get on the road. Welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast.
We started this podcast to share our stories and hear from others about their adventures in men's work.
Join us on the journey to our fully authentic selves, emotional healing, and the meaning of modern masculinity.
Here on Authenticity Road.
Hello, and welcome to the Authenticity Road podcast. I am Etor, and this week on the podcast, I am joined by Shane Thrapp. Shane is the founder of Creating Order from Chaos and an ADHD coach and business consultant. He works to empower people with ADHD to find their authentic selves and collaborates with companies on neurodivergent inclusivity and accommodations. He also works as the operations director at the nonprofit Men's ADHD Support Group as a driving force furthering their mission of supporting men with ADHD. Shane is a fascinating guy, just brimming with interesting information, and I am delighted that he is here with me today, and I'm looking forward to a stimulating conversation. Shane, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, our pleasure. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a 42-year-old father of four. I've got a 21-year-old, a 17-year-old, and two 4-year-old toddlers. And I'm an ADHD life coach. And I do a lot of different things, all kind of underneath the same umbrella of creating order from chaos.
How did you get here? And why did you choose this path?
I grew up in the rural South in Northeast Texas. And from an early age, I really had an understanding that I was very much different from those around me. And this caused a large number of issues for me because whenever it came to, wanting to fit in and trying to find my way through everything, it was difficult. And I didn't know that I had ADHD, and I was just that odd guy, right? Further compounding on this issue was my father was an alcoholic, and he was very abusive. And being neurodivergent in the South, there was a certain level of expectation of what I was supposed to be as a man. I should be a hunter. I should be able to be self-sufficient. I needed to be able to work with my hands. And by and large, I didn't have really any big problems with that. But when it came to doing what I wanted to do, though, I wanted to read. I wanted to write. I wanted to learn and research. Those were my passions, but they weren't seen as good things by generally anyone in my family.
Right.
Which, though, did make me actually really good in school. But I was still very different from those who were around me. My brain works differently, and that's one of the things that we understand about ADHD now, is that it's simply a different way of thinking. Our brain is structured in such a way where we process things in different ways, and as children we develop in certain ways and develop in different ways, and that doesn't fall within the umbrella of neurotypical. And I didn't know I had ADHD, nor did I know that I was also on the spectrum. And so as I got older and older and started having a family and going through a very, very messy divorce with an abusive ex-wife, when I was 28, 29, I started really trying to figure out who I was. And I went on a really strong, passionate journey of self-discovery. But not just self-discovery, but also self-acceptance. Again, I didn't know I had ADHD, nor did I know that I was on the autism spectrum. I just thought it was different.
So when did you get those diagnoses?
When I was 34 and 38.
Wow. So that came real late. Okay. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just was curious.
No, it is becoming more and more common for men and women to be finding out then later in life that they have some sort of neurodivergence. For me, though, it was just, when I was 28, I had started actually being successful in my career because I had just started understanding that I worked differently. That, it was, I had developed an early on love for management and leadership, and that eventually turned into project management. But I didn't fall into that neurotypical mindset of working for a company for X number of years until I retired or died. I started noticing that I had a trend. I would work at a job. I would be in the job for a little while. I would get bored with the job. I'd hate the job. I'd leave the job. Sometimes within 3 to 8 months. Very rarely worked any job for more than that. And I had developed a skill set that I really thought was valuable, and that was in project management, and that's what I started focusing on. I walked into headhunters and recruiting agencies and said, I need to find work where I can do project management for 3 to 8 months. Here's my certifications. Here's my letters of references. Can you help me? And they were ecstatic for it because they had a whole bunch of these small temporary jobs, but other project managers would pass them over because they were having that mindset of, I'm supposed to work for X number of years.
And the last time we spoke, I love the way you put it. You had said, send me on the interview and I guarantee that I will get that job.
Yeah. I got access to the internet at age 12. I had started developing an understanding that I was a very odd individual early on.
Right.
Now I have access to the knowledge center of the world at this point. And of course, it was AOL and a 28.8 modem. And, the screens loaded very slowly. But when it came to really trying to figure out things, I had watched a TV show, I think it was on Oprah, and she had a world-renowned body language reader, a person who understood facial characteristics and body language, and I found that fascinating. And so I started delving into that. And so I accidentally found the way to start addressing some of my issues with social cues by learning body language. And that just kind of followed me through life. I had to learn in such a way to not emotionally or inherently understand body language and social cues, but to understand them on a logical side of things. It was like programming a computer for me. And as I got older, this made me actually fairly socially adept. And as in leadership, it was very valuable.
Right. Of course.
And along the way, part of that is being able to sell myself, to sell my abilities to be able to do certain things.
Right.
My father also taught me from a very early age how to bullshit. My dad could sell anything. In fact, he could sell things so well that for a little while he would buy and sell cars. He would buy a car that was kind of funky and he would do a lot of work on it, get it really to a point where it was running well. So there was kind of like dragging me along with that one, grease monkeying out and working on cars and then selling them. And he would just make deals with people. He would buy a car for $500, flip it for $2,500. He would buy a truck for $300 and flip it for $2,900. And there was one point whenever he was just at a guy's house and a guy had an old car sitting in the side, and my dad was like, you pay me $500, I'll go ahead and tow that car away. And like, he brought the car home, fixed the brakes on it, and he had that car for 15 years. and he got paid to take it away from me. He took the money that they paid him to buy the parts he needed for the brakes and everything. And it was insane stuff like that. But he taught me so much about how to sell myself. And along with that and learning the different things I could learn through body language, I was just really good at, if I could get in front of people, I could sell. And if it meant selling myself, I could do that. And there's a certain skill set when it comes to ADHD, hyperfocusing, where I would walk into an interview knowing everything about the company. And the sheer knowledge that I was able to bring to it allowed me, even if I didn't have the exact skill set that they were looking for, I had the ability to learn it and they could tell. And that's where my expertise came into play. I could walk into any company that I needed to walk into, and within 1 week, I would know almost everything there was about it. Not from just like reading the manuals or anything like that, but that was a part of it. But because I would go walk and talk to the people who did the work, and I would find the subject matter experts, and I would find the people with the skill sets that as a project manager, I knew I would need. Because I've always been a servant-based leader. I am here to empower the people who can do the work. And that means as a project manager, my role was to find people who would be able to answer the questions that I may not be able to, or do the things that I couldn't do. I'm not a programmer. I know a little bit. I know how to talk about it. But I know how to find those who do, and I know enough about it that when they sit here and tell me about it, combined with my ability to read body language, I would be able to know who was lying to me and who was telling the truth.
That's a valuable skill for a leader.
Mm-hmm. And
so before we go any further, I want to back up for 1 second. So you've thrown out some terms here that are terms that we hear on a daily basis. And I think that we hear them so often that we think we know what they mean. But just to set the record straight, when you say ADHD or neurodivergent or spectrum, what do those things really mean?
So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And it's probably one of the worst names ever for a disorder. Primarily what it is there's three different presentations of it. There's hyperactive, there's inattentive, and there's combined. Hyperactivity is the external hyperness that a lot of people associate with ADHD. It is the kid sitting in the corner, kicking his leg, doing really crazy impulsive stuff, bouncing off the walls. It's the standard thought process that people have around what ADHD is. Inattentive is the hyperactivity of the mind. This is where they are the daydreamers, the super creatives, but they can't stay focused on anything. Their mind wanders in the middle of a conversation. They cannot focus on anything that's boring them. They are thinking of the wild blue sky and the fancy rainbows. They're the daydreamers. Mm-hmm. And it combined, which is the most common presentation that we see in adults, is just kind of a combination of all of them. Now, it's also important to understand that these aren't static terms. These presentations can shift and change depending on our stress levels, where we're at, environment, the support system we have around us. All kinds of things can change these from time to time. And so the diagnosis that we see when people sit here and say, I have inattentive ADHD, happens to just be what they were presenting at the time of discussing it with a psychiatrist.
Okay.
Neurodivergence is the collection of different mental types that are out there.
Okay.
Everybody kind of normally falls into a mindset of neurotypical, where they generally fall into guidelines of what people consider normal, and that's air quoted.
Right.
And when we talk about neurodivergence, we're talking about people who have ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, PTSD, certain types of other mental health issues. These all kind of fall into the neurodivergence, because the differences between our brains and other people's brains is pretty significant on a micro scale. When it comes to ADHD, we have a little bit different structure throughout the prefrontal cortex, basal ganglia, limbic system, and the different parts of the brain that have to do with executive function and emotional regulation and memory. I'm not going to delve in too far into what I mean by those parts of the brain now that I think about it, because it gets into super nerd land at that point. But,
we'll steer clear of super nerd land.
Yeah, but primarily what it is it's just there's a neurochemical in the brain called dopamine that allows those parts of the brain to communicate more effectively, and people with ADHD have a lack of that dopamine. Okay. It's oversimplification, but that's what I can do right now. Autism spectrum disorder is a kind of a cousin to that, where people with ADHD often deal with like cognitive and executive dysfunctions. People with autism often deal with social dysfunction, where they have a lack of self-awareness and ability to communicate effectively, and social cues and things of that nature.
Okay. Yeah, because when you approach me and say, I have ADHD and I am on the autism spectrum, as someone who has no knowledge of this, I think, well, Shane is someone with whom I am not going to be able to have a conversation. Right? Because when I think of those terms, and those terms being applied as diagnoses, I think of these really sort of profound, extreme cases that are the stuff of movies and TV and things like that. So when you tell me that those are your diagnoses, I think, he and I are going to have nothing to talk about. He's going to be this fill in the blank,
Rain Man?
Right. This weird introverted guy who speaks cryptically, and we're not going to be able to communicate. And obviously that's so not true. That's the opposite of the situation. You and I communicate really well.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, it's Ator again. Sorry to interrupt the show, but I want to tell you about something I'm really excited about. If you've been listening for a while, you know how important it is to take time for self-reflection and growth. That's exactly why I've created the Ink and Authenticity Men's Creative Writing Workshop. This is a 6-session online workshop designed specifically for men. Whether you're looking to explore your identity, challenge societal expectations, or simply find a creative outlet to process your life, this workshop gives you the space to do that. It's not about being a professional writer. It's about telling your story, digging deep, and connecting with others on the same journey. Each session is filled with prompts and discussions that will help you understand yourself better, all in a supportive and open environment. So if you want a way to write, reflect, and share, join me for ink and authenticity. Just visit authenticityroad.online/workshop to learn more and register. Now let's get back to the show.
Right. That's one of those things that makes ADHD and autism so difficult for people to understand. And it's honestly why I wanted to come on your show, because when people think of those two different things, they have a stereotype in their mind. They have the child throwing a massive tantrum and screaming incoherently. That is an aspect of autism spectrum disorder. And for a very long time, I had to deal with those issues. When they think about ADHD, they think of the white kid losing his mind and busting windows. And for a very long time, I did fit into that category. But I am one of those lucky few where, as I got older, in many different ways, I found coping mechanisms that worked for me that, for the most part, were healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Developing an understanding that I was different when I was, 25 to 28, that my working ethic was different than others, that my relationships styles were different. I had just gotten to a place in my mind where I learned how to accept myself for those things, even if at the point I didn't know that my brain was actually structured differently.
Right.
When I was 30, my son was diagnosed with ADHD, my oldest son. And I knew his mother was not going to be supportive of mental health and his issues that he would deal with. And so I started learning everything I could about it. And as I'm learning about it and I'm going from year to year to kind of help him, and I'm like, it becomes this massive hyper focus of mine. And then one day I'm going to take a quiz and just see what it comes up with, right? And I take this quiz and I'm like 90 percentile, ADHD.
Wow.
And I walk into the room with my now wife, who's a special needs teacher, and I go, "Hey, I think I have ADHD." And she was like, "Oh, honey, you didn't know?" I was like, "No, I didn't know." She goes,
Oh my God.
"Yeah, I thought you knew." I'm like, "Why didn't you say something?" She just like, "I thought you were just being a dude about it." And I just remember looking at her. I'm like, "How long have you known?" She's like, "Since I read your dating profile." And I'm like, I'm in shock, because this is a thing that I've been struggling with. And like, it was in, I see this a lot in the men's group where they like, I just discovered why I was always weird.
Right.
And, for some people, there's a sense of relief. I have a reason, right? I have a reason why I couldn't keep a job for very long. I had a reason why I bounced from relationship to relationship. I had a reason why I struggled with certain things in school, but I did amazing at other things. And as I started going into this and I started really digging, now it becomes an obsession. And as I'm kind of going through this, I'm still a project manager.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started making a project out of myself. And, it became this system where I wanted to understand so much about it that, mental health was so important to me. I just started really delving into it. And this is when I really took it seriously and started going to see doctors. I went to a psychiatrist. The first psychiatrist I went to, when I told her what I dealt with, and I told her, I was like, "I think I have ADHD. Here's the symptoms that I've recognized that are ADHD." And she told me, "Adults don't have ADHD. You grow out of that." At this point, That's not what the science says. The science
Right.
says that ADHD is a lifelong disorder that people live with. Just only children have ADHD. And in my mind, I'm going, okay, so she's a professional. She's a
Right.
psychiatrist. She should know these things.
Right.
So she puts me on depression medications. She diagnoses me with depression. And it doesn't work. In fact, the depression medications actually do a lot of harm to me. And I actually wound up having a mental breakdown in 2016. I was going through a lot of different family issues because of my ex-wife and her being a very abusive person and having done a large number of different things to turn my children away from me. My oldest 2 children. Along with a large number of other different issues that are a lot of my fault, and I own them. But whenever I started trying to be a part of my kids' lives, my biggest goal was just to be there for them. And there was a situation that happened where my oldest son, came out to his mother and his stepfather, and they kicked him out at 11.
Oh my God.
And I didn't know what to do. I couldn't do anything. He was too far away from me for me to really do anything. So I called the sheriff's office, and the sheriff's office did what they could. But, she was the custodial parent. So they wound up taking him back, and she recognized that she had done something wrong and that she would get in trouble. She continued that kind of thing. And that was enough to send me over the edge. Because what a lot of people don't realize about ADHD is there's this thing called emotional dysregulation. And I had talked about it earlier. There's a part of our brain, the limbic system, that controls how our emotions work. And the basal ganglia is the part of our brain that deals with impulsivity. Both of those issues, when we sit here, we talk about ADHD and autism and other issues that deal with emotional dysregulation. When it comes to ADHD, we feel things more. We're 3 times more likely to develop PTSD from simpler traumas. We are 5 times more likely to develop complex PTSD, which is the long-term exposure to trauma and abuse. We are 4 times more likely to develop some sort of depression, 3 times more likely to develop some sort of anxiety, and we have a 34% more likelihood to develop some sort of addiction to alcohol, marijuana, any kind of drug. When we factor in like food, sugar, video games, other things like that, 80%.
Wow.
And at this point, this triggered a mental breakdown for me. It was too overwhelming. I didn't have any way to process the stress and frustration. I was still in that trying to discover how to deal with that stress and frustration. And I was having a hard time being able to modulate that because I didn't have any medication. Medication is often something that we actually have to have when it comes to emotional regulation because the chemicals don't quite work. And so there's things like Lamictal or guanfacine and clonidine that we can take to kind of regulate that stuff a little bit easier until we get in place the tools that we need to be able to process frustration and stress. I was still in the beginning phases of that, and I had the mental breakdown, and I was sick for a few months because my body was just done.
Right.
But I didn't take any breaks. I didn't take any time to heal because I still had that mindset that as a provider, I had to go to work until I couldn't. Another aspect of emotional dysregulation is a thing called overwhelm and burnout. When we go too far, when we push ourselves too hard, when we do not take the time to heal, when we get to overwhelm, that's our warning sign, right? It's like the knee starts twinging up on you real bad.
Right.
And if you keep trying to run on it, especially strenuous running where you're like really trying to work out, if the hamstring tears or something along those lines, that's burnout. That's
Right.
the equivalent of that in your brain. And if you keep trying to run on that, like torn hamstring, it becomes a catastrophic breakdown of your knee. If you keep trying to push through and fight through burnout, it becomes a catastrophic break in your mind, which then turns into physiological damage to your body. And for me in 2018, I developed fibromyalgia, which is a crippling neurological condition that causes severe pain throughout your entire body, primarily in your joints. And I became bedridden for a few months. And I lost my job. And by the way, the company did their best. They let me work from home. They were super understanding, but at a certain point, they just can't continue that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And that was probably one of the darkest years of my life. Then in the beginning of 2019, we found out that we were about to have twins with my new wife. And she stepped up. Pregnant and everything, she stepped up. She was there for me. She gave me all of the emotional support I could use, and then some. She said, you know what, this is probably a blessing in disguise, because you'll be able to stay at home with the kids. And then when the kids were born, they were born at 27 weeks, very premature. And this meant that as a stay-at-home father, I had a responsibility to be there for them in a much more significant manner than we had planned. But I still wanted to also work. And I started working with a lady who helped me with ADHD coaching. I had amazing therapy at this point, and I had really started developing the skill sets I needed. And I had been studying ADHD for years at this point. And that was where everything started for me. That was the point where I'm going to do this. I'm going to be an ADHD coach, and I'm going to hopefully help people not suffer with what I did. Or if they have been suffering from what I did, I'm at least going to help them heal faster and not make the same mistakes that I did.
Wow. That is quite a journey. One of the things that strikes me about your story is there's sort of this man box toxicity about it. And that is that in your upbringing, you weren't allowed to feel what you were feeling. And then when you, later on in life, when you were having all of these feelings coming up, and you were headed towards a breakdown, you wouldn't even allow yourself to engage in that, right? Because a man has got to provide. The man has got to do and be there. And you couldn't show any sign of, and there's air quotes around this, weakness.
Yeah.
And then you said that, your wife stepped up and provided you with the emotional support that you needed, that you got to feel those emotions in a safe way and in a safe space. And so that's the first thing that comes up for me around what you were just saying. And that is just that, not that you would not have had these difficulties, but how different your journey would have been if you had been surrounded by a more emotionally supportive community, and if you had allowed yourself the luxury of not being a victim of the bandbox.
Yeah. When I don't like using the term toxic masculinity, right? Not because it's a trigger word for a lot of people, but because it just doesn't quite fit the actual issue. What we see in a large number of different cultures are just a stereotype of what a man is supposed to be within that specific culture, right? And we see this in Hispanic cultures, Asian cultures, Southern United States cultures, Northern, We see this in different types of African countries and European. There's a certain mindset of what a man is supposed to be in these different areas. And for the most part, being self-sufficient, being able to be the support, the strength, the provider, these are, for the most part, healthy mindsets to have. To be resilient, to be strong, to be, able to stand up and protect your family. These are healthy and amazing mindsets to have until they're taken too far.
Mm-hmm.
When stoicism becomes, you are not allowed to express any feeling. When protection turns into ownership and jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
When strength turns into never admitting a weakness. When courage is not facing the fear, it is being the person who dominates.
Yeah.
Right? Whenever we look at these different mindsets, when they're taken too far, and often in very rural, in very insular communities, that's what happens. And religion plays a large role in this as well. That's where we see people not being able to find the support that they need. And we are starting to see that now in the last decade or so, of where we have to start breaking down and understanding the healthy mindsets that we have to put in place versus the toxic mindsets that we see in place. And that's hard. That's difficult for a large number of different people. And it's actually very difficult for people who are autistic or on the spectrum, because any kind of change in mindset or anything along those lines is extremely, extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain rule I'm supposed to follow. If I don't follow this rule, then I'm breaking the rules.
Right.
And there's a certain thing I'm supposed to be doing when I'm told to do it. Like, there's these very locked in mindsets that can come from having ADHD and autism.
Right.
And when people sit here and break those rules or say that we can't do those things, we have a sense of justice trigger that pops into place. And that sense of justice tells us that anything that goes outside of the rule set that we've created in our lives needs to be attacked. And since many of us grew up in very violent mindsets through trauma and abuse, that's what we think the response is often supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional dysregulation, when it comes into the play at this point, turns into violence, verbal abuse, physical violence, rejection sensitivity, where we lash out at those people who we feel are rejecting us for who we are. And this is where we see a lot of things go south for men. We can be abusive. In fact, that's what happened in my first marriage. She was abusive to me, and in the same way that women may be abusive is through mental and emotional abuse, I responded in kind through mental and emotional abuse towards her. Unfortunately, towards my children, there was physical abuse. I'd set the bar really low for myself as far as like how I was going to treat my kids. My thought process was, as long as I don't beat them randomly like my dad did me, as long as I don't scream at them and get drunk around them, then I think I'm going to be okay here. But that didn't stop me from punishing them when they did something wrong, usually by using a belt or something. For a long time, it took me a long time to understand that was abuse.
Right. Yeah. That reminds me of something that I heard someone say recently along the lines of, I take a belt to my kids because my dad took a belt to me and I turned out okay. And the response was, well, the fact that you think that physical violence is the right response means that you did not turn out okay. And so that's what reminded me of that.
Yeah. What's so damaging with that mindset is because a lot of people, men and women alike, whenever they sit here and have to deal with a child who has ADHD and or autism, it's very difficult to parent that child. Mm-hmm. Because that child doesn't have the developmental understanding of how to control their emotions. Right. They don't have the developmental understanding of how to control their impulsivity. They don't know how to sit here and respond to feeling like their world is crashing down around them, and they are constantly overwhelmed by the stimuli that they have going on around them. Mm-hmm. And if that stimuli coming from a parent is matching the same energy as they have, it's doubly overwhelming, and then they lash out and they start having issues like oppositional defiance disorder and other issues like that, where they have no agency and their parents are at wit's end and they don't know how to parent this child.
Yeah.
And then they hit the child. They spank the child. They discipline the child. They yell at the child. They scream at the child. And guess what? When you hit a person who has a very little social understanding and mentally speaking aren't at the age that you think they are, they don't understand that they're being disciplined. Mm-hmm. What they learn to understand is that the person that they're supposed to trust the most in the world just hit them. Mm-hmm. And they don't have the memory to know that it's because they did something wrong, because they can't even recognize what they did was wrong. Mm. And that
just made me feel very sad. That just pierced me right through.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Whenever people look at children, and whenever we look at the science and the data behind children with ADHD and autism, neurodevelopmentally speaking, they can be as 2 to 4 years behind their neurotypical peers. Mm. Socially, cognitively, executive behavior, all of these are affected by ADHD and autism. And so when we sit here and we talk about a child who is 6 years old, emotionally, cognitively, socially, behaviorally, that child may be as young as 2. And if you have a 6-year-old who's acting like a 2-year-old because they lost a toy, or they, are not able to stay still in school, and the teacher's losing their mind, and all of these different things that can happen, what do you do as a parent? And you were raised that a child is supposed to be seen and not heard, and they have a duty to sit here and go to school and do the right thing and listen and not sit here and be hyperactive or impulsive or anything like that.
Yeah.
Your average 6-year-old who has ADHD is twice as hyperactive as their neurotypical counterparts. They're 3 times more impulsive than their neurotypical counterparts because their brains are structured that way. Yeah. When a child is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, they're anywhere from 2 to 4 years behind their peers.
Wow.
And we live in an education system that puts children in place through age. Mm-hmm. And so these children who have mindsets that are significantly younger than their peers don't fit in.
Right.
You think about the child who still plays with dolls whenever they're 12 and all their friends are playing with phones and stuff like that. And everybody makes fun of that child. Children can be cruel.
So you decide that you're going to become a coach. Mm-hmm. And you bring to this a unique perspective and a unique set of skills that you have developed in forming your own journey, and informing your own journey, and in achieving some great results. And you bring this out to the world. And so what I'm curious is, I'm curious about a lot of things, but on the one hand, Like, I just want to say, are there people listening right now who may be ADHD, who may have ADHD and not even know it, just in the same way that you did not know it until you were in your 30s? But the other question that comes up for me really strongly is, do men have a different set of difficulties or a greater set of difficulties than women do in dealing with these issues, in emotional regulation, and in just living life as a person with ADHD?
I won't say more difficult. I will say much different.
Okay.
So women tend to be underdiagnosed at a significant level. And this is especially so for minorities and other people in that realm. This is because they often present with inattentive ADHD, or they have a different type of autism, which is a little bit different on the spectrum. It's not that ADHD is different from gender identity to gender identity. It's just the social constructs that we have around us causes us to present in different ways. And for men, it is the repression of the emotions and the lack of support and the lack of any kind of real direction nor acceptance, right? We don't get the acceptance from our teachers, our parents, our friends. It's very hard for us to make new relationships. If we are part of the 80% of people who have some sort of trauma with their parenting and abuse from those around them, it is a significant issue. For women, it is, since they are primarily inattentive for the most part, it's so much more internal. It's so much more, they're the daydreamer, they're the creative, they are the quiet ones, because they don't know how to connect with anybody because they're so far in their own minds. And so they may be a lot more socially awkward, or they actually may learn, just like men, to mask in such a way to become toxic. Because very early on, a large number of children with ADHD, autism, who have the functioning skills to do so, learn to mask. Neurotypical people mask as well, but because of the issues that children with ADHD and autism, high-functioning autism face, if they are able to mask, they do. And for us, with the neurodevelopmental issues that we already struggled with, we very rarely develop an understanding or a sense of self. Because everybody around us is trying to teach us to fit into this neurotypical mold that we don't fit into. We don't get that positive self-affirmation from people. We don't learn how to do that. What we do learn is that everything we do is a failure and is a mistake. We are the dumbest smart kids. We are the, why can't you be like this person? Why can't you be like that person? Why can't you do this? Why can't, how can you sit here and read a book in 2 days, but you can't do basic math? Why can't I, when I call you in the classroom, why can't you answer the question, but yet you test so well?
Right.
We're not allowed to tell a teacher that she's boring as fuck. Right? If we do that, and granted, there's a large number of us who do, but we're not supposed to do that.
Right.
Right? And that gets back to our parents. The average child with ADHD or autism by the age of 12 has heard 20,000 more negative criticisms than their neurotypical counterpart.
Wow.
Because the expectations of the child are too high, because they are not neurodevelopmentally the same as their neurotypical counterparts.
Right.
And that challenge right there turns into those who can mask, and they seem somewhat neurotypical. And then as they get older and they get out of school and they lose the structure of school, a little bit more stress starts to happen. And as they get into the workforce, a little bit more stress starts to happen. And whenever they get married and they have kids and they start losing jobs and they're in a bad relationship and they're dealing with different things that they have to deal with, women being abused by men, men being abused by women. Whenever they're sitting dealing with this as they get older and older, eventually that mask breaks. And now a large number of them lose the support from the people around them because it's so difficult to be their friend. Because now the emotional dysregulation is starting to happen. The men are becoming more angrier. The women are becoming more emotional. The men are starting to lash out at the people around them. The women are starting to become insular and more depressed and more socially inept. And they're starting to become more insular and not going out in public. Right. The men are starting to abuse their wives. The women are starting to abuse their husbands. It's this nasty situation that women and men deal with. And because that mask breaks somewhere around the age of 28 to 35, that's when we start to see people starting to recognize that something is actually wrong. For men, though, it won't be, and it may not be until 35 to 40 when their relationships shatter. The spouse refuses to put up with this bullshit. It's also the most often time when men find themselves who may have been in very successful jobs doing something that was very dynamic, where they were able to sit here and actually be successful at that job, or if they went to the military, or if they were police officers or EMTs or other things of that nature, whereas there's that dynamic structure within the work that they're doing, construction, high-end sales. And then they get to 30 and to 35, and they've done such a good job. They were so successful at that point that they get put into a chair job behind a desk. They don't have that that input.
And that's where it falls apart.
That's where it falls apart. Everything becomes so catastrophically an issue. They can't have the same success that they did have. And then people start saying those things. Why can't you do these very basic issues? Then they start having emotional dysregulation because it goes back in time. They hear what their parents said, their teachers said, their peers.
And so then is that when folks find themselves working with you?
Honestly, yeah.
As a coach, yeah.
My clients primarily range from 30 to 45. And they are usually either going through a divorce or they've gone through multiple divorces at that point, or they feel like they're on the edge of divorce, and often they are on the edge of divorce.
So when folks reach out to you, are these folks who have always known that they had ADHD, or are these people like you who figured it out later in life?
A large number of people are people who have just figured it out later in life. Mm-hmm. Some of them may have had a diagnosis early on, but the thing is about the diagnosis, especially for those who are 30 and older, is we didn't know back then, and it wasn't as prevalent back then, especially in the different rural areas and things of that nature, that children with ADHD needed to have therapy first. They needed to have significant early intervention behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. And the parents had to be included in that so that they would understand how to parent this child in a way that would allow them to process and learn at the pace that they needed to.
Right.
The education system wasn't as well informed as it is now to be able to see here and say, hey, here's some issues that we're dealing with. This child may need to be put behind a little bit so that they're able to learn things in a way that matches their natural pace. We may need to give these children some tutoring so that they're able to keep up and maintain these grades in the way that is going to work for them. Many of them didn't have that. What they had was a doctor handing them a pack of Ritalin and saying, here, go forth.
Yeah.
So much of treating ADHD has to be in skill building, and it needs to be in an age where the neuroplasticity of the brain allows them to be able to put in these tools in place.
So there's sort of you have to look at this as a hybrid chemical and behavioral model.
Honestly, primarily it's a behavioral model. Because
is there, go ahead.
Because the thing is because of the neurodevelopmental thing, because we're put into a situation where we're having to keep up with everybody around us, the expectation is to keep up. We don't develop the skills that we need to be able to compensate for the struggles that we have in a neurotypical world. Primarily, and even till now, the primary treatment for children, even in therapy, is to make them neurotypical, is to force them to be neurotypical, to force them to meet these standards that are neurotypical. It's only been within the last 5 years that we started understanding that children and adults with ADHD need acceptance, and they need skill training where they are able to utilize their own specific skill set, their own strengths, their own values, their own understanding of who they are, working with external tools and external sources of support like therapists and things of that nature to develop systems and routines and rituals that work within their own boundaries. Not to be a neurotypical, but to be a person with ADHD and find acceptance within that.
Right. And what that makes me question then is, in your work, in your coaching work, as you're helping people through these crisis times, and you're helping them, I assume you are helping them embrace their neurodivergence, right? What are some of the tools that you give adults in learning to embrace their authentic selves, to appreciate their journey, to deal with what they're dealing with?
I take them back to when they were children, honestly. Not in a patronizing way or anything along those lines, but what we have to learn is, who are they? They learn to mask early on. So we need to figure out who they actually are. So this means delving into, what are their values? Values are the things that make us inherently who we are. We have to learn and understand their strengths, right? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And how can you learn to put in place external tools like reminders or alarms or task lists or using calendars? How do you build these systems once you understand your values and who you are, once you understand your strengths and what you can do and easily can do, and what your weakness is? How do we put in place these tools for you to use? Because neurotypical people have an inherent understanding of how to do a large number of these things naturally. People with ADHD and autism have to have external tools to make up for the lack of that inherent knowledge. We have to have external tools to break up time, because neurotypical people see time as past, present, future, A, B, C. For people with ADHD, time is a completely foreign concept. It's this wibbly wobbly, like squished together thing. There is now, and there is then, and there is never.
Right.
And our memory doesn't work in the same way as people with, who are neurotypical does. When people think about something that's happened in the past, they literally can remember it.
Right.
For us, we have a trigger-based memory, and it's responsive, right? It's responds to stimuli. It reacts to stimuli. And so if we smell the baking cookies, it will make us think of, in my case, my grandmother. And all of our memories are tied to strong emotional circumstances. If we have a large history of trauma background, then our responses are often going to reflect that. Much like the soldier who has PTSD, who hears a firecracker and he snaps and he goes into that mode. when somebody says something to us that sounds very similar, maybe it's the tone or the words used, even if it's not meant in that way, it often takes us back to when we were kids and our parent or the teacher was saying that same thing to us and we snap.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you XYZ thing?
Right.
I'm not responding to what this person just said to me. I'm responding from a mindset of a 30-year-old man addressing an issue that happened to him when he was 7. And my response is what I wish I could have said then. And I'm saying it now.
Yeah.
That rage, that anger, that frustration, that stress, that snaps. And that's where we see these very, very violent reactions when it comes to certain things.
Is one of the problems that you find that you encounter in your work, and forget for a moment the sort of the day-to-day difficulties, but that there is a lack of self-love and a lack of self-acceptance because of all of the negative messages that folks have been pummeled with their entire lives. And so that part of the journey back is to learn to accept and love oneself.
Yeah, we deal with imposter syndrome. Again, neurotypical people do as well. The problem comes from is that as children and going into that back into that neurodevelopmental stage from 2 to 12, they built an understanding of who they are based primarily on the external input that they were getting. Your average child who is neurotypical, they can develop a fairly decent understanding of their self, and for the most part, some of it comes from external sources, and a large percentage of it, especially as they get older, comes from their own sense of self. Part of the struggle with ADHD is we don't have that self-awareness.
Right.
People with autism do not have that self-awareness, and we don't learn it. What we learn is all that negativity. And if we don't learn to mask early on and are able to kind of meet the social expectations around us, and we keep making all these little mistakes that are blown out of proportion, we develop a fear of making mistakes. We develop a fear of failure. And if that continues throughout our life, right? We know what we know what happens, right? We develop this imposter syndrome that tells us every single time that we go to take a chance that we can't take that chance. What if we mess up? What if we fail? If I fail, I'm just going to be another screw up, just like everybody's saying.
Right.
If I've been masking this entire time, I'm so desperately scared to make any mistakes that will show that I'm actually masking. I can't let people see the real me because the real me is a fuck up. It's a complete screw up. It's not like nobody's going to love me if I mess up.
Yeah.
And so that develops into this crippling sense of never taking chances, of not learning from your mistakes, of not learning from your failures. In fact, not making failures or admitting their failures, because if they do, it's a catastrophic issue. And there's no way to grow without learning from failure. Right. There's no way to get better in life without being able to look at your mistakes and take time to address them and then move forward. That's what I help people understand and teach them. You have to be okay with having failures in your life. I have to be okay and understand that I failed as a father to my first 2 children. What am I going to learn from it?
Right.
I have to change that shame and that guilt to what am I going to do about it? And that means going with my next 2 children and doing my best with them.
Right.
And doing my best with my first 2 children to heal and be a part of their life and be the support that they need and be the love that they need and be the acceptance that they need. I can't go back in time and fix what I did wrong.
Right.
But I can be better moving forward.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you can talk just a little bit about your nonprofit men's ADHD support group.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think folks would love to hear about that.
So the men's ADHD support group started in 2019 by a absolutely amazing individual by the name of Mark Almodovar. He was walking through the park one day in New York City, and he goes, "You know what I don't see anywhere is a place for men to be able to go and just have this safe space to talk about what they need to talk about." And he had actually, been diagnosed with ADHD at 16, and he was 24, 25 at the time. And so he decided to create a Facebook group. And the Facebook group was dedicated to just giving men a safe space to be able to talk about what they dealt with, what their struggles were with their ADHD, and start to find a place to learn how to heal. And at first it went kind of slow, went through 2019, but then with the pandemic, a large number of people started recognizing mental health was an issue. A large number of men started getting diagnosed with ADHD, and they found their way into this one place because, again, there was no other men's ADHD support group really that was out there. There was one that was created by ADA, but not really that well done. Chad had also tried to put that out there. These are different ADHD organizations. They're primarily for children.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't really take off. But with the Men's ADHD Support Group Facebook group, it took off. Because Mark didn't just stop with providing that safe space. He put in place rules and expectations of how he wanted people to treat each other. There was no shaming people for talking about things that they struggled with. There was no bullying them or telling them to man the fuck up and to just do what they have to do. There was acceptance. He promoted people who would talk about acceptance and understanding and being empathetic and being sympathetic and being there to support people. He provided this space, and he put in place moderators and admins who would not put up with men bringing toxicity in the group, but they would first try to educate them. Hey guys, this is a toxic mindset, and we have to work beyond it, and we have to look and be more empathetic. We have to learn how to be okay with somebody struggling with erectile dysfunction, right? You can't ridicule that person for something that they can't control.
Mm-hmm.
And by educating people, he started getting people to understand. But he also had firm boundaries. He would remove people, and the mod team and the admin team would remove people who weren't in a place to be able to accept that. And then in 2022, February, I had really started, my coaching business had really taken off. But I wanted to kind of I needed some sort of giving back. I needed to be able to give back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started talking and sharing comments and thoughts and stuff like that. And what I loved about the group was there was also no self-promotion. Coaches couldn't go in there and target these men who were going through so many bad things. There was none of that predatory sales or anything like that. It was just a place of self-love and acceptance. And I messaged him. He had posted a thing about needing moderators. I said, hey, I'd love to be involved. I don't do things by half measures. He brought me in, and I did my thing. I'm a project manager. I started putting in place a lot. I started working with him and really developing that business mindset and saying, hey, we really need to make sure we're expanding into Twitter, and we need to make sure we have a Facebook page, and we need to make sure we're on Instagram more. He had done a good job with Instagram, and he had done an amazing job with Twitter, but we needed to be more. We needed to expand more. We needed to provide this service. We needed to be there. And in October of 2022, we were sitting around, and just like whenever he decided just to impulsively create the group in 2019, I said, why don't we turn this into a nonprofit? And of course, the mind melding happened immediately. That's a brilliant idea. What does that mean? What do we have to do? And I said, no problem. I'll take care of it.
I can handle it.
I've got you, brother. And And seriously, within a month, we had filed everything. We had gotten the money together. We had filed all the documentation. We had gotten our acceptance letter from the IRS super fast, and we've been growing ever since. We went from 12,000 when I first started to over 16,000 members in the Facebook group. We've got a pretty amazing mailing list. We are starting to really develop other programs that we're putting in place. We started a Twitch channel because damn well Twitch has all of our peoples in there, right? And we have a Discord server where people can go to and get instantaneous chat and support. We are working with a company called Focus101.com for body doubling and doing different things for productivity. We have weekly calls every Sunday where we have breakdowns of very specific issues. Like yesterday, we actually just went over executive function and emotional dysregulation and how they're affected by each other. Mm-hmm. And we have these, and we have so many other programs. We're actually going to be speaking at the International ADHD Conference in late November, early December, November 30th to December 2nd. And we've been the recipient of a huge grant from Starbucks of over $5,000 so far this year. Wow. $5,000. So we're able to sit here and turn around and pull all that stuff together. And my skill set being what it is, I designed a website. I built all the different business side of things. I'm doing all these different things, but we work so well together because Mark is extroverted and he loves spreading awareness in social media and things along those lines. He loves doing the videos. I am a little bit more introverted. I say a little bit more introverted. I'm a lot bit more introverted. And I do podcasts and I do these kinds of things where it's easier for me to communicate effectively with people. And I've got a voice for radio, not a face for radio. That's a joke, by the way. I am actually pretty handsome. But we both have our strengths and we both support each other. And we've got an amazing team who work with us, a teacher, other coaches, social media managers and different people like that. And we all really work well together, but not just like in a professional manner, but we are also there for each other, right? We hold each other up. We hold each other accountable. We show acceptance and we show love. And we are getting a lot of traction from a large number of different organizations. I had mentioned earlier, but CHAD, we're starting to work with the regional organizers for CHAD and developing a men's support system for them. We are working with ADA and, we're doing different things with them. A large number of us have been on some really big podcasts, ADHD Rewired. In fact, one of the largest ADHD podcasts out there, Brendan Mahan of the ADHD Essentials, just came on our board as an advisor, as a part of our board of directors. Wow. And, we're really starting to see a huge influx of people recognizing this absolute need for a safe place for men to talk about the struggles that they have with ADHD.
Yeah. And how do guys find you?
So you can go to www.mensadhdsupportgroup.org, or you can look us up on Facebook. Because again, we're the only thing that's out there like us. We hit that niche market, and we're going to take this one over. And
we'll definitely put that link in the show notes.
Right.
But yeah. So mensadhdsupportgroup.org.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Great. We will have that in the show notes. So as we're coming towards the end of our time together, we have two questions that we ask every guest who appears on the show. And it's your turn in the hot seat. And they're softball questions or not. It all depends on how deep you want to go when you answer it. The first question is, what does the word authenticity mean to you?
Oh, man. Authenticity means being happy with who you are, regardless of what you've gone through, and regardless of what others have told you you are.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's a great answer. Thank you for that. The second answer might require a little bit more thought. Or the second question, that is. And that is, what is the thing that I didn't ask you that you wish I had asked you?
By the way, I'm just staring off into the wild blue yonder for those who are listening. Awkward silence. Man, you did such a good job that this is a really hard question to answer.
I can also ask the question a different way.
Sure, go for it. Let's see if
that
it
might open a different door for you.
Yeah.
And that is that if folks listening could have one takeaway, what would the most important takeaway be?
That's a much easier question. So I want people to walk away from this podcast going, I need to know if that feeling that I've had all of my life of being different, of feeling like I can't keep a job and I keep bouncing from job to job and relationship to relationship, and I keep finding myself struggling with constantly being bored, and I cannot keep a hobby for longer than 6 months, and I keep feeling these extreme feelings. I wonder if I have ADHD. And then I want y'all to reach out to me at creatingorderfromchaos.com and have a discussion with me about that. Or reach out to your psychiatrist or a therapist.
But that link will also be in the show notes.
Yeah. Shameless self-promotion.
creatingorderfromchaos.com. Shane, is there anything else that you need to say before we part ways today?
I need everyone to understand, and especially you, that you did an absolutely amazing job being a host today. And
oh, golly.
You deserve all of the success that you can possibly get. And for those out there who are struggling, you need people in your life who recognize the good that you do and the good that you are. And you need to hold on to those people and be open and vulnerable to those people.
Wow. Gorgeous. Thank you, Shane. Shane Thrapp, creatingorderfromchaos.com. Shane, I am so grateful for the time that we had together today. I am so grateful for you and for the work that you're doing and for how you made your journey into service to others, which is just beautiful. I am excited to have you back on the show again. I know that we sort of talked about that offline, but Shane's got lots more things to talk about and lots more things that he and I have in common that we'd love to discuss. And so we're looking forward to having you back. Thank you so much. Well,
thank you for having me on.
Yeah, anytime. And so it is time for us to throw the bags back into the jalopy and get back onto the authenticity road. So on behalf of the show, I'm Ator. And until we meet again, please be authentic. Goodbye, everybody. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when a new episode is posted.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope what you've heard will help you on the road to your personal authenticity.
Visit us at www.authenticityroad.online.